Well, thank you everybody for joining Torah Cafe this morning. The last time I was here was the interview weekend, the Shabbos, and it was a highlight of the trip. I really love Torah Cafe. I think it's such a special place. So I'm really excited to be back on the other side of things now. So the question I want to bring to us today is, what makes you great? And I don't mean personally you, I mean, what makes an individual great? And that's not good. It's not nice. The question I'm concerned about today is, what makes you great? So any initial thoughts?
In your mind last night,
Go for it.
what other people think of you.
So Ron says it's what other people think of you. And I think he means that tongue in cheek. Am I right?
Not completely.
Maybe not. Okay, maybe
Not completely.
sincerely. Good. Good. So that's a great segue into the first text, but we won't go there just yet.
It goes back not to others, it goes back to self-evaluation and to the degree that people know who and what they are and their values, despite what they're surrounded by.
Great. So remember these two.
Self.
Good. Remember these two answers because both are going to be represented in the text. It's about self-evaluation, right? Who you are. Yes.
When you take time to put others before yourself as far as what their needs and desires and how you can make things better.
Good. Putting others before yourself. You are 3 for 3 in terms of where our texts are going to take us. So keep all 3 in mind. Yes.
Hold on, what Linda said, your actions,
Your actions.
what you do. So thinking about the recent political stuff and, was it freedom of speech or was it actions?
Good.
You know,
Actions, right? And not just intentions, right? Actions. Yes.
Inspire others to do great things.
Ability to inspire others to do great things. So not just are you personally great, but have you inspired greatness in others? Love it. Yes.
I think to keep improving yourself, whatever you see that are needs, just keep getting, moving forward.
Good. So greatness isn't like a line in the sand that you cross. It's your own, it's relative to your own personal growth. As long as you are growing, you don't have to hit a certain marker. You just have to be on the staircase up. On the ladder. Yes.
What makes me so incredibly great is I'm very humble.
Good. Yeah. Being the most humble person there is. Yes. Good. Love it. Love it. But humility, that's key. Yes. Sheila and then Ron. Yeah. Well, maybe not. Good. So good. So Sheila is pointing to maybe being great isn't always a positive thing. Maybe there is a cost to greatness.
We're looking at the English word great. Whatever you want to say politically, you have to say that Trump is great. Positive or negative.
Oh, interesting. Okay, interesting.
No,
Right.
No.
Good.
Is he someone that people respect?
Good.
And there were
Good. So that is also going to be in one of our texts. Is greatness making it into the history book for good or for bad? But you're in the history book. So does that make you great? Good question. Ron.
I wanted to go back to my comment. When the spies went into Canaan the first time, they thought how great the Amalekites were, but they really weren't.
Right.
So
Right,
it
we
was
are
their
grasshoppers on a-
perception
yes.
of them
Yes.
that made them great.
Right.
They really weren't great.
Right. So perception plays a key in size and stature. Last comment, then we're going to dive into our first text.
I'd like to carry this on to a larger level. Initially, I said totally self. It's not totally self. As Jews, if we are supposed to be an or Goyim,
Yeah.
and there are Jews out there, like certain ones I could mention, who are the lowest of the lowest,
Sure.
Goyim who are prejudiced in an era of anti-Semitism, say, there's another Jew, look at what he did.
Yeah,
On
right.
the other hand, there are Jews on the other side who are exemplary.
Yes.
And so both ways.
Good. But I like
We're
the,
bound to be
Yeah.
judged by other people.
right. So being an Orla Goyim, what does it mean to be a light unto the nations? Good. I want to dive into our first, we have a lot of text and I'm keeping us to a strict 45-minute study because I want to sync up with the other service. So who wants to read? This is from Akev from our weekly Parsha this week. Who wants to read in the English, our first text? Any volunteers? Please, yeah.
only this to you here.
Oh, sorry. And now Israel, what does the Lord your God demand of you? Now take it away.
Israel, what does the Lord your God demand of you? And this, to revere the Lord your God to walk on God's paths, to love God, to serve the work of God with all your heart and soul.
This is one of my favorite psukim. It's one of my favorite verses. God is saying, this is all. Moses is telling people, what does God want of you? This is it, these things. What's missing from this list?
Mitzvot.
Oh, maybe mitzvot? Although I might
Well-
argue that mitzvot are contained in it because,
To serve the
yes,
Lord.
I would say it's God's paths. But that's up for, everything is interpretation. But I might say mitzvot are in there arguably. What's missing though, for sure?
How great
Thank you.
these are very humble things to do.
Yes.
These are very modest things to do.
Good. There is no express injunction by God to be great. But there is what's here. Okay, good. Let's jump into our first commentary. This comes from a collection of largely Hasidic texts from Iturei Torah. Beautiful, it means like the gems of Torah. But this first text isn't so much Hasidic as it is Musar. Musar is, remember, somebody was saying greatness means, I think it was Elliot, your internal introspection and working on your traits. That's what Musar is, cultivating good traits. So who wants to read this story? Great, please.
Only this to review.
Good, that's the pasuk that it's now going to comment on.
They tell the story that once Rabbi Yisrael Salanter praised one of his students, Rabbi Simcha Zissel from Kelm, saying that he was a whole person, Hebrew Shalem, and master of noble traits, and reciting about him, all of you is fair, my companion, and there is no blemish in you.
High praise, huh?
Shir Shirim 4:7. Another rabbi who heard these words said, perhaps this Rabbi Simcha Zissel is a perfect tzaddik, but if he had truly devoted himself to Talmud and poskim, the legal decisions, he would have been made a great one in Israel. Rabbi Israel Salanter said to him, the halacha is that when there is before you a big challah that is torn into and a small challah that is whole, we bless on the whole one. Meaning fullness and uprightness is more important than greatness.
Shlimut v'tmimut hashovim migdadlut. That being whole, being pure. Interesting, tamim is used for, does anybody remember where ish tamim is used?
It's usually a modest or simple, or simple, and here
Simple.
the translation is upright.
Yes, but it's also right for Noach. He was an ish tamim, so he was an upright person in his generation, right? So being whole, shalem, and what do you find in the root shalem there?
Shalom.
Shalom, right? So being whole and complete has something to do with shalom, peace. Maybe it's inner peace, maybe it's peace, shalom bayit. There's something about being whole that is linked to shalom. And then that is more important than being great. So I want to quickly just say one quick thing. Also to Zoom, the source sheet is located on the website. If you don't have it in front of you, if you go to the Torah Cafe tabs, you should be able to access the source sheet and want to make sure that you have everything. Little bit of context, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter is the founder of the Musar movement. He 19th century Lithuania. Okay, I love this text. I want to make sure that we really appreciate the image here of the challahs. So one quick thing, on Shabbat, if we have two challahs in front of us, one that's big and impressive, but it's already been torn into, and one that is small, maybe it's a little nebush challah, but it hasn't been, it's whole, it's shalem. What do we bless over? The small one because it's whole. That is the halacha, right? That's what we do over challah. Yes, Sheila?
You could translate that by saying it's going to be
Exactly, right?
intellectual.
Good. And this goes back to what Ron was saying about what other people think, right? Because that's exactly what happens here. The rabbi says, oh, you're praising your student using Shir HaShirim. There is no blemish in you. You're perfect, right? If he's so perfect, if he's such a big shot, how come I never heard of him, right? He would be on the Sanhedrin. He would be on the Great Court. I would have heard of this guy if he's really worth the praise you're giving him. And his response is, it's not always about being the making the history book or making the great court. This person has mastered himself. He is a master of noble traits. He is shalem. He is whole. And that is always more worth aspiring to than greatness. Any reflections, reactions on this text? It's one of my favorites. I love it.
I keep thinking about the Holocaust and all the people who came out of there broken.
Mm-hmm. Good. Oh, I love that. Okay, so she's saying, well, what about all of the people who emerged from the Holocaust broken? If you know, this is a text about shleimut, about wholeness, and the merit, how great it is to be whole rather than great. And you're saying, well, wait a minute. Are we ever shalem? Is anyone ever shalem? Especially if you've experienced such an unspeakable tragedy.
Soldiers in Israel.
All soldiers in Israel, right? So what does it even mean to be shalem? Can you be? I think it's great. But I would now quote, I think it's Rav Nachman of Breslov, that there is nothing more whole than a broken heart. So I would go now one step further and say that actually it's your brokenness that makes you whole. This is something that Rabbi Alex is going to talk about in her sermon today about wellness. We are told to carry the broken tablets that Moses shatters in the same ark as the whole ones. So I think brokenness actually isn't so much different than wholeness. Yes, how you respond to the brokenness. Good.
I have a very good friend who. I have a very good friend whose daughter is in jail and the outcome is not good, and we're all childhood friends of Rabbi Shubis, who's the chief rabbi of Torah. And his mind is like, you know, we can't affect the outcome, but how we respond, how we help, how we. So I don't know if that has to do with fullness or, but.
No, absolutely.
Uprightness, I don't know what Hebrew word that is, it's kind of an interesting
Yeah.
English word, I just sort of feel like standing up to whatever the challenges were, or temptations were.
I love it.
Kind of like that English word, I don't know what it would be.
Tamimim.
I'm not sure which one it is.
Here it's tamimut, like ish, like Noah was a ish
I
tamim.
don't think that's a word we hear in English.
Upright.
that often.
Yeah. So
What does that mean?
Yes. First and foremost, I am really sorry that she's going through that, you're going through that. And wishing her foolish name, even though I hear you saying that it doesn't look good. So, but exactly that it's how you respond to the obstacle and challenges, not that you've scaled Mount Everest, but if you can master yourself, if you could come to some inner peace in the face of adversity, that is certainly what the Musar movement tries to achieve. I know everybody's got so many great comments. I want to keep moving and hold on to your comments because we'll have more time at the end once we get through the text. So I want to move on to Kedushat Levi on Noah, right? Ish Tamim, right? A man who is upright in his time. But this is a counterpoint. This is now going to take one end of the spectrum. Don't worry about greatness. Just worry about wholeness. Now we're going to go to the other side of the spectrum. The Kedushat Levi is another Hasidic rabbi. He comes from 18th century Poland, now Ukraine area. So who wants to read in English? We're on the second page of the handout. Please, yeah.
Why didn't Noah pray to avert the decree?
Good. I'm going to pause just for some context. The flood, right? God is sending the flood. Noah is a good servant who goes to build the ark. But the question that Kedushat Levi is asking is, well, that wasn't really enough. It doesn't say anywhere that Noah tried to stop the flood. Right? Abraham tries to stop the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? But why didn't Noah do that? Okay, go ahead.
Because there is a certain type of tzaddik who serves the creator, but is meek and worthless in their own eyes and thinks from the depths of their heart, who am I to pray that a decree be averted? So they don't even pray to avert the decree. And Noah, even though he was righteous and wholehearted, he was tiny and insignificant in his own eyes. He didn't believe in himself that he was a powerful tzaddik and he could actually avert the decree and that he could actually avert the decree against the people. On the contrary, he saw himself just like everyone else in his generation. So he told himself, I am no better than anyone else in my generation. So if I'm going to be saved, so too will they. As a result, he did nothing to fight to avert the decree against them.
Good. It goes back to Iran's comment about perception. It also goes back to Chad's comment about humility, right? It's like here, Noah was so humble to a fault. He thought, I'm not better than anyone else, right? God isn't going to save the world from if God is saving me, surely God is going to save everybody else. Or alternatively, who am I to stand up to God? Right? Abraham has the chutzpah to stand up to God, and Noah, who am I? And as a result, so he was wholehearted. Let's say that Noah was shalem, right? He and his family are spared. He is whole. He is good. But he didn't even think he was capable of greatness. So he never tried to achieve it. And as a result, the world is destroyed. So why this speaks to me so much is that if we all only focus on shlemut, only on our own personal wholeness, we neglect the fact that the world is broken and needs us to fix it. If we don't, who will?
At the risk of getting caught up in semantics, it seems like a different definition of humility than the definition we use for Moshe, who's supposed to have been the most humble man and whoever was. So I'm not sure what to make of that. Maybe I am getting caught up in semantics, or maybe humility isn't the right word.
So say a little bit more. So you're saying that Kedushat Levi, his describing Noah as humility seems like a different kind of humility than what Moses is described as?
Moses doesn't have any trouble, obviously, talking with God. He talks with God in a way that none of us ever will and nobody else ever has.
Good. I'll push back for just a second and say, remember, Moses says, who am I that you would choose me? Right, then somebody else.
But he still engages.
But he engages. Fair.
In fact, Noah doesn't seem to really engage at all. He just goes about building the ark.
Right.
There are all kinds of midrashim about people making fun of him building the ark.
Right.
And he still doesn't, I mean,
Right.
it looks like a different word, maybe meekness, maybe obedience. I don't know.
Okay,
It
good.
doesn't feel like
Fair.
the right word.
Yes.
But it's no, in his own generation.
Right.
In other words, he isn't such a tzaddik necessarily. It's just compared to everybody else.
Right. Exactly. Had he been in Abraham's generation, he wouldn't have been.
The word great, your topic at the beginning, what makes you great? Something that's become great.
Yeah, good.
In generation, they're gonna remember you,
Right.
they're gonna remember you for.
Right.
You don't wanna know it.
Exactly. And not having control over that too. Rebecca, yeah.
Jonah runs away too, so it feels like there's this consistent theme
Yeah.
of God calling out and individuals saying, not so much.
Yep.
So I don't know what that says about.
Yeah.
People are willing to listen to God, so.
Good, I love it. And right, Jonah, Saul also was basically all, and the problem is the opposite. The people who, Absalom, let's say David's son, the people who self-appoint and say, follow me, those are generally those are the scary ones that it doesn't go. But the meek ones who say, why me, who am I? That God sees leadership potential there. Right.
And that's, I think, because they grow into that, like Moshe, who originally was humble, he grew into his greatness, you
Right.
could say, or he began to speak up to God. I mean, he's the one that told, don't destroy this people on the top, when he was ready to destroy.
Good, because I love that.
Said that, he would never had, like you said, the chutzpah to say that before. So
I'm
he,
thinking of Korach, right? Korach saying maybe, but I love that idea of like, maybe God chooses not empty vessels, that very substantial, but vessels that can be filled. It's not so full of ego that there can't be room for growth, and God, divinity to pour through.
yes. Yeah.
Thanks. Clay Kodesh, right? Yeah.
This whole business about who haya ish tzaddik b'dorotav.
Yes.
When you're living in an era where everybody seems mediocre or everybody seems great,
Yes.
how do you feel if you're the one who is either pushed forward or steps forward when you don't seem any better than anybody else? I mean,
Right.
if you look through the generations of the people who've been leaders in the United States and in other countries, sometimes the person who was chosen seems very ordinary. And I'm thinking of Harry Truman as an example of
Sure.
that. And steps up to the times and meets the challenge, even though there didn't seem to be anything particularly special about them. And so I think this text about Noah is sort of about like that. I'm just one of the other people here in the neighborhood. I don't seem to be any better than anybody else. Why me?
Well, isn't that great that in our tradition, everybody can achieve greatness, right? One of the great things about our heroes is that they're all flawed. There is no perfect, Shalem. character. Everybody has their flaws to indicate that we can all aspire to be great. Any one of us can can be called by God, right, to follow, and we're given a roadmap, right? We're given mitzvot, we're given Torah. So it's not lo b'shamayim here. It's not too far away from individual one of us to make that step forward. We're all capable of greatness, right? And wholeness. Anyway, so, okay, right now we've covered both poles of the spectrum, right? It's all about being shalem. It's all about being whole. No. It's not about wholeness. It's not enough. Be great. Noah missed the opportunity to be great. He should have interceded. Okay, so it's all about greatness. It's all about wholeness. And now, like you might be anticipating, we're gonna pave a middle path. So that's our path forward now. This next text is from Ellen Davis. She is a professor of theology at Duke. She gave basically what's like a sermon on the book of Ruth. And I just want to read the first two paragraphs. So who can volunteer for the first two paragraphs? Don't even read the third because it's a typo. It's a
Ruth
holdover from.
refutes the great man theory of history, the notion that all the really important events occur in war rooms or on battlefields or even on holy mountains. The story gives hope because it shows ordinary people helping each other grow through and beyond personal tragedy. What opens up through acts of generosity and mutual regard is something far beyond their own small sphere, beyond what they know or imagine. Probably none of them ever saw the grandbaby, the great-grandson to be precise, whose name is the last word, literally the last word of their story. Yet what opens up through David is the future God intends for Israel.
Great. So what I love about this is the book of Ruth is all about small acts of chesed, of loving kindness, right? Ruth clings to her stepmother Naomi, who is widowed and loses her sons. And Ruth says, wherever you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will be buried. That is a small, relatively in the scheme of the world. It's not a battle. It's not right. It's not a political theater. This is just clinging to another person in love, right? And then once Ruth is an outsider, a Moabite, right, in back in the land, she is supported by Boaz, who says to his workers, don't harass her, let her gather more of the barley harvest, right? So all of these little acts of kindness, and then Boaz ultimately they get married, which is another act of kindness to a kinswoman, to each other, right? And through those small acts of chesed, King David is born. Ruth is the great grandmother of King David, and David represents the Mashiach, right? Our messianic line, which we can interpret many different ways, but I'll interpret it now as the ideal future of what Jewish values and peace and harmony among the nations, right? Swords into plowshares, right? That vision doesn't come through a great big war, doesn't come through the things that would make the history books. It comes through where you go, I will go, right? It comes through the accumulated acts of kindness. Yes.
I think the fact that Naomi, who is mother-in-law, which in many cultures is a very problematic situation. And Ruth was able to transcend the kind of trouble that other people with their mother-in-law.
I love that. And I think it's a serious point, and I also think it's a deeply funny point. That if you can get over the in-law tension, you will have redeemed all of humanity. I think that's yeah. That's great. I love that. And also remember, Ruth is a Moabite. It's not to marry. That's one of the forbidden nations to marry into. So also the idea of, Abraham and Sarah had an open tent. The fact that we would welcome a stranger into the fold who deeply wants to be a part of us, right? That kind of, reaching across the aisle to somebody different and welcoming them in. That is what is great. Those little acts that are all within our potential to do all the time. That is greatness. And it doesn't come at the expense of wholeness, like the other things might. To be a great, president, to be a great military leader, to be a great, whatever the textbooks are, right? Those things, the shleimut, this is a story of family. and it leads to greatness. Yes,
It makes me think or wonder that the Christianity doesn't make much of Ruth. And yet, as you say, with the mother-in-law, here is a whole value, a whole mitzvah system that they can incorporate, and I don't think it really appears in Christianity, you know, in their creed and everything,
interesting.
because they start with Jesus. Jesus was descended from, I don't even think they use the word David.
Well, I know David is a big character for them as well, yeah.
Because of Isaiah 11. right?
Yeah. Yeah, they still go by David being, because they claim that Jesus comes from the Davidic line.
So therefore, he's entitled to be.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Interesting. Right, so you're saying Ruth should be emphasized more, and I certainly,
Values, I mean, the fact that she, you know, she wanted to have a future for one.
Mhm. Yeah.
I explained it up with abortion and everything in birth control.
Mhm.
And see if we had birth control at all, we would not have.
This is now another whole conversation we could have. But I like that point that Ruth is underappreciated, because I think it is one of my favorite books and deserves to be more talked about. Yeah.
In the Torah portion, it talks about love the proselyte. And that God loves that person more because they chose. So it fits in.
Yeah, good. Good. So pointing to loving the proselyte being in the Parsha and that it fits in here. Good, that's another good tie-in. Good, okay, so I want to move on to the next text now. And now we're reaching where I want us to land today. I want to read one more pasuk from this week's Parsha, which you may all recognize, and then end with one more commentary. So who wants to read? This is from Devarim 11:19. By the way, Zoom can also chime in and read. You don't feel like you can't read because but anybody who wants. I saw a hand over here. Yeah, please.
And teach them to your children, reciting them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up.
Good. Where does this come from?
Shema.
Shema, right? Good.
Or vice versa.
Or the Shema comes from this. Yeah. That is more accurate. Now, I want to dive into this last text from Sipurei Tzadikim, another Hasidic text. Who wants to read in English? I know I don't have the whole Hebrew here. It would have been too long to reproduce, but I took what was my favorite line, the very final phrase. But who wants to read the English? Please.
A young man who was a Hasid of the Kotzker
Another Hasidic Rebbe, big one.
was supported by his father-in-law and would spend all his time studying Torah and practicing Hasidism. But he eventually had to support his wife and growing family. And as a result, his Torah study and Hasidism suffered. He sought help from the Kotzker, who told him, the Mishnah, Makot 23, states that God wanted to help Israel, and so gave them Torah with its many commandments. But wouldn't it have been more helpful if Torah had fewer commandments so busy people could still fulfill everything? Rather, God wanted Torah and commandments to enter into every phase of a person's life. A farmer must leave produce for the poor, give to the Levites, not mix species, etc. One who builds a house must build a parapet and affix a mezuzah. Business people must pay their workers on time. God therefore gave the Torah many commandments, extending them into every corner of one's life. When you sit in your house and when you walk on the way, each person has their own place in God's scheme of things.
Kol echad bimkomo ve'inyanav. Right, so somebody at the beginning mentioned mitzvot. When I said, what makes you great? Somebody said a system of mitzvot. And that to me is where I come down on this, that it is not just about shleimut. It's not only being, musar, focusing on your cultivating inward traits, because that's not enough. The world needs you to act, right? But at the same time, it's not only about greatness, making the history books, because that comes at a cost of often yourself. If you're the big challah, everyone wants a piece of you, right? And the result is you're stretched too thin. There's nothing left. Or like the protagonist, I guess, in this little text, he wants to just study all the time and be a chassid who's a gadol in his generation. I just want to study and learn. This unfortunately is still the case, right? There are many people, Haredim in Israel, who just want, right, and don't necessarily engage with or serve in the military. There, it's a larger conversation in itself. But this idea of I don't, what do I do now? I have a family, right? But they're tugging on me, and I just want to learn. The Kotzker Rabbi says, you're not supposed to just be in the Beit Midrash all the time, right? God gives commandments. He says, it's not so that you're so busy that you can't possibly do all these commandments. The point that the reason God gave us so many commandments, hello, welcome, come join. The reason God gave us so many commandments is that for each and every phase of a person's life, there are small acts of, mitzvot that make you great. It's not that you have to do each and every one and drive yourself crazy. It's that if you're building a house, here are little things you can do to make life more meaningful or to help other people. If you're a farmer, here's a small way to, right? It's not about, I have to become a farmer and do it. I have to build a house. It's so that every piece of your life can be infused with Kedusha, with holiness, and with greatness, and with wholeness. So here's you can have both answer. Right, Gadlut and Shleimut, greatness and wholeness, because in the Shema it says, when you are in your home and when you go out on your way. I'll just say a personal note here. I want to be the best rabbi I can be for this community, to some extent to myself, right? I want to be, I would love to be great. I would love to be a great rabbi, right? But I also want to balance the other aspects of life. Since I was born, my parents are on this call. I've been infused with a real sense of family, and that's what life is all about. Is love, whether it's family or friends or whatever the core relationships in your life, right? And I want to be whole. I want to feel like I'm not that big challah that's torn up, right? I want to feel shalem, even if it means being a little smaller, right? So. When I'm in my house, when you're in your house, and when you're on your way, when you're doing whatever, you want to leave back your legacy behind in the world, it's not a choice of either or, right? It's a combination of both. God gives us so many mitzvot so that we can achieve greatness as we strive to achieve wholeness in our lives. Every phase of life can be infused with Kedusha. I want to open it up for more discussions, points, counterpoints. Anybody who had a thought from earlier that they wanted to share? Yes.
It's interesting to me that the examples given as the counterpoint to the yeshiva bocher who wants to sit the whole time are from two very active occupations. They're not from, neither one is a sitting occupation.
Right.
The
Yes.
farmer and the builder, saying that every person, no matter what your job is, what your occupation is, can still follow the mitzvot. You don't have to spend all your time at the study table.
Right.
And I think that's a very important point that in our day is being argued about in certain settings about how, and not just if you're Haredi, how long do you have to go to graduate school? How many degrees do you have to attain before you can go out into the workforce? This whole idea of whether you take it as mitzvot or as the responsibilities of managing your life as an adult. I mean, all of us can think of young people well into their 30s who still get a parental subsidy because they're still not in the workforce.
Right. One of my rabbis from seminary, from Ziegler, she would always invite us to her sukkah, every sukkot, and she had a big panel that listed all the rabbis from Talmud and Mishnah and what their job was. So, he was a cobbler. He was a blacksmith. Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah.
definition at the beginning is approachability.
Mhm.
In other words, if you can't transmit it to someone, if someone can't talk to you, then so you're great. But I can't really, I can't ask questions in a class.
Sure. Yeah, that's going back to like the Harry Truman thing, right? Can I get a beer with him? There's always a question about that, like,
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, you're not approachable.
Yeah.
Then what good is your knowledge?
Good. Absolutely, yes.
To me, one of the most beautiful aspects of Judaism is elevating the profane or everyday life and all the blessings that we have for everything. And which I don't know, but I remember being in Yerushalayim when I was studying there. And someone more religious than me smelled flowers and then said a bracha over smelling of the flowers, which I just thought was amazing that he knew the blessing and that there is a blessing for that. So I think it speaks to this, that we have all these blessings and they're not just limited to religious ceremonies, but they're really about daily life. And I wish I knew more.
Absolutely though, right? Literally stopping to smell the flowers, but just expanding our definition of greatness, right? That small, like that is great, right? Anytime that you elevate something from profanity to holiness, that is great. And the mitzvah system, right? Say 100 blessings a day, right? These are ways that anybody can achieve greatness. And that's why there are so many of them. You could say 100 blessings a day, like it's too much. I'm going to be so busy. I'm going to be, it's too much. No, the point is there are all these ways that whatever stage of life, wherever you are on the way, there are ways to achieve greatness in your life and wholeness. Yeah.
This talk about greatness and achieving it, if Jews are supposed to be an Or L'Goyim, exemplary, to use a term that I think is becoming trite these days, mindful. To be mindful of every moment, every half second, of mindful of with whom we are interacting.
Right.
So thinking before we speak, a word can destroy a relationship.
Yeah.
So mindfulness seem to be so important if we're to function on an optimal level and to achieve that greatness, whatever it is, in a variety of contexts.
Exactly. How mindfulness and wholeness go hand in hand with greatness, right? If you're able to take that time to be so introspective and work on, make sure master what goes out of your mouth, which is very hard to do, but that is great. Just little victories like that accumulated, right? Yes.
And to kind of piggyback on mindfulness, this last part that we read, it's not so much that there are so many mitzvot about, it's how can you be mindful of your situation and take just a moment to be thankful for what you have and what you can do, as opposed to reading about it and sitting there and figuring out what you could do. The mitzvot is actually about doing it, not thinking it.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk about, you mentioned a few things there, but the first thing about appreciation, right? That if you're constantly striving for what you don't have or comparing to what other people have and you want, right? This is sort of the slippery slope of pursuing greatness without balancing it with any other things we're talking about, right? Why aren't I this, right? I should be here by now, or I need to be having done this at this age and all this stuff. And comparing it to others as if there's limited slots of greatness that only a few people can fill, right? The rat race kind of thing. And that's why I love this last verse so much. We all, right, I'm just going to read it verbatim. Each person has their own place in God's scheme of things, right? There's room enough for everybody. Everybody can achieve wholeness and greatness in their own ways. It's not a race for the limited slots, right? So appreciating what you have, not trying to strive for what you don't. Yeah.
So then there's the other buzzword, gratitude.
Mhm.
That's so crucial to be able to express gratitude. A lot of times we don't.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right. The challah blessing, right, goes back to the phrase, right? Like Rebecca's saying about the blessing for smelling flowers. But the first one, Rabbi Salanter, is talking about a blessing over challah, right? And by the way, this week's parsha, we get a lot of gratitude because we get the origin of the Birkat Hamazon comes from this. And interestingly enough, there is no commandment to pray in the Torah. So you ask, where does it come from? It's all the rabbis who say, well, Abraham got up early, that was for Shacharis, right? And then it's all the, all the patriarchs instituted the three Mincha and Mariv, and but all of this is rabbinic midrash and interpretation. Ultimately halakha, of course, except for the Birkat Hamazon. The only prayer that is actually commanded is in this week's Parsha, the Birkat Hamazon. And you could ask yourself, isn't that interesting? God doesn't command us in Torah to 3 times a day tell God how wonderful and great God is. God Lud again, the greatness of God, right? Rather, God commands us for Shlemut. God says, I want you to appreciate that you ate today. That if you decide that you need to pray to me 3 times a day, wonderful. That I'd love to hear from you. That's great. But what I really want is grateful. I just want you to be grateful that, and mindful, where did this food come from and who doesn't have food and what did it take to get this on my plate? That's the only prayer God commands us. Yeah, you're here in the middle, yeah.
I was thinking in line with what we just read, that the greater a person is, God expects more of them. So this great tzaddik, let's say, he's expected to take care of his family and so on. So, and it also makes me think of when God judges each person, it's according to their potential, what they could have done.
Yeah.
So, not just what they do, but what they could have done given their abilities.
Yes, the relativity of everything, right? Why did Moses get left out of the promised land, right? Moses was he was our greatest leader. All he did was hit the rock, right? But the point is Moses was twice, thank you. You still have a chip on your shoulder about it. Because Moses was Moses. He was judged to a higher standard. He had this special relationship with God, right? So it's not, we're not necessarily all on the same like judgment plate, right? You expect more, same with our leaders. You say, well, like, should they be held accountable for something they did 40 years ago? That's a debate, maybe not. But why are we having that debate? Because they should represent the best of us, right? Sometimes it's relative and there are different standards. Last couple comments and then we'll wrap up because we're at the mark. Let's go, Elliot, and yes.
I just wonder in terms of this talk about achieving, if our goal is greatness, whatever that is, how do we deal with what are some of the Jewish concepts that relate to the reality that we only have so much time to accomplish this goal?
Right.
We take a break on Shabbos. There are all these malachas or things we're not supposed to do. What are we supposed to do in the meantime? And what are some of the Kabbalistic notions on time and how we use time maximally to achieve this greatness?
I love that. But part of the point there I just want to say is that model of we only have 6 days to be great because one day is downtime. What I think this is helping us see is, wait, Shabbos is what's great. It's flip it. It's not the 6 days to work and be great. And one day we have to rest. That rest is what's great. Right? And it's not either or. The 6 days should be great and Shabbat should be great, but you need both. You need wholeness and you need greatness.
All I was going to say is it reminds me of another story we sometimes talk about where Rabbi Susha is talking about when he would face the heavenly court, if you will. The question wouldn't be why wasn't he Moshe? The question would be why wasn't he Zusha?
Exactly. Right? To stop trying to be like somebody else, but who are you? That's who God created you to be, and you're depriving us of that person if you're trying to be anybody else. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you everybody for joining. It's always such a pleasure to learn from you. I really appreciate all of your insights and wisdom. I just want to end with this final idea. Each person has their own place in God's scheme of things. It's not a dichotomous choice between greatness and wholeness. It's a combination of both. What makes you great? Mitzvot. How do we imbue our lives with holiness, with gratitude and appreciation, and with the everyday acts of chesed and kindness that bring forth the Mashiach? Bimhera b'yameinu, amen.